Well, I'm glad to be here with teachers. I'm an ex-teacher myself. I taught for 29 years in the public school system, topology and chemistry. And then I have a second life. And so anyway, my favorite people are teachers and master managers. They're also teachers, right? Yeah. Right, okay. So the title of my project is Pollinators and Other Wildlife in the Prairie Ecosystem. And Wendy asked me to make it kind of issue-oriented. And I said, okay, that's not a problem because, boy, if there's any group that has issues, it's definitely prairie pollinators and wildlife. So there's just issues all over the place. So it's got a little bit of that. The first part will be basically some of the issues that the species that I'm going to highlight face. And then the second part is some of the things that you can do here in the Houston area with your schools, with your homes, or volunteering on prairies or whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you're going over here. Okay. I'm just, let's see, so this might be a little. Okay,
Debbie's
still
coming
not.
to the rescue.
It might have gotten turned. Did it get turned off again? Look at the side.
It's not moving forward. Okay. Yeah. That keeps going on. There you go. So, of course, the big issue with pollinators is the huge decline that we're seeing. And it's not just monarchs. I wanted to put this up here to start with because I know everybody hears about the monarchs, and yes, their decline is dramatic and we're really worried about it, but it's not just the monarchs. It's lots of other butterflies too. I think the most shocking thing in this one to me was this species right here. This is a red admiral. And if any of you know anything about butterflies, that is an extremely common butterfly, or it was. And I have noticed, I do a lot of butterfly surveys actually on a bunch of the impact properties plus other properties that I manage through my business. And I've already noticed this decline in all the butterfly species. I've been involved in a project where we've been tracking butterfly numbers associated with various types of restoration. And when we first started out, we had much bigger numbers. This was about 5 years ago than what we're getting now on any 1 month. And we do the same thing, each time we do it once a month. And that was one of the most common butterflies that I would see. And now I'm not seeing it as often because you would see these all year long and in fairly good numbers. Not so much anymore. In the swallowtail there is another one that people recognize. There are a number of species of swallowtail, and it's a particular one, but the fact that these recognizable butterflies that we all know, those big white butterflies, remember those used to be so common in the spring, now they're going too. So all of our butterflies are facing declines of one kind or another.
Pat, may I ask where you got that graphic?
What?
That's a really good graphic. Where'd you get that graphic?
UK butterfly monitoring scheme.
It's
I can't read that far.
it's through a group that's out of one of the northeastern states. I think it's Vermont, and they have a big initiative up there to try to bring pollinators back. And I think it's some of the stuff that they put out. What I can do if y'all want, there's a really nice reference with this. And I'd be happy to, they'll share the mailing list with me. I'd be happy to share those references with you if you'd like that. Okay, and I'm not sure how to get this thing to move forward here. Let me just, what did you do? Okay, and so when I said that it's not just the butterflies, it's actually all of the insects right now. And even honeybees have become very scarce compared to what they once were. And it's a very concerning thing because when you talk about the food we eat, the crops that we eat, and so forth, It's not about honey, it's not about the bees, it's about all the stuff that they pollinate. This one is interesting to me. 100% pollination is required for almonds. Do you like those? Most everybody does. They're used in a lot of ways. We're not going to have those if we don't have them pollinated by something. Now, we're hoping that maybe some of our native pollinators will be able to take the place of the honeybees if necessary, but that's a big if, and they don't have the big hives. They're mostly solitary bees. So them being able to really take up all the slack, who knows? It's a big question for everybody. I keep getting it every time. Try that one. Okay. There we go. So I wanted to mention the study that just came out recently in the news. I don't know if you've heard about it or not. It was done in Germany, and it was just published recently about a 75% drop in insect biomass in all these nature preserves that were in Germany. They weren't testing the cities or any development areas or anything like that. They were testing pristine type habitats, what are left in Germany. And this was a citizen science project, and I wanted to mention that because a lot of you are with a master naturalist, or you may want to do some citizen science stuff with your students. This was a citizen science project, and it went over 25 years. And basically all they did is they set out these traps, and they trapped insects same time, same place, same way for over 20 years. And then they looked at their data, and they were shocked when they did, because what they found out was that they had about a 75% decrease in the amount of insect biomass. So they weren't looking, no one has actually analyzed, specific insects out of that. But the fact that there was that much of a drop over those 20 years or so that they had been sampling was amazing. This may be one of the most critical pieces of research to come out in the last 50 years, because it's a warning. It's a big warning. And it was done by citizen science. So I wanted to mention that again, because I think teachers with their students have an opportunity to help with that kind of information, as master naturalists often do too, becoming involved with projects. One of the things that we want to do with our prairies in the Native Prairies Association of Texas system is we want to start collecting data ourselves, similar to what they did with this project, because we'd like to see if we get similar results here. Nobody else has really done much of this. So we're just now starting to think about it. Okay, it's not just the monarch, it's not just the butterflies, it's insects in general. And that should be scary to everybody, because ecosystems basically run on whatever insects are there and how they all interact with each other in the environment that they're in. And this particular diagram is useful too. It shows the decline in the Lepidoptera, which we all know, those are the butterflies. But look at this. This is the line that represents the insects, and it's a lot lower than the butterflies are. So that's telling us that it's not just our butterfly pollinators, it's all of the insects, and that should be real concerning. This graph here is one that they did in Vermont. As I mentioned, there were some studies done, and that's where a lot of the grass had come from. Up here is a list of a lot of the neotropical songbirds that live in the forest there. And so what they did is they've been tracking populations using point counts for the birds. And what they found over time is that they were gradually decreasing, which matches the decreases that we've seen in the insect populations. Those are birds that rely primarily on insects in the summer when they're here in North America breeding. They go to South America for the winter. But when they're here during their breeding season, they rely on insects. And they'll eat other things too, but primarily insects. And if they're not there, or if they decrease in availability, then those populations decrease too. And what about diversity? Is it having these decreases that we're seeing, whatever they're caused by, is it having an impact on diversity? Well, I found this one the most interesting. Look at this. This red means that it's decreasing off the charts. And that is the group called Orthoptera. They include the grasshoppers and lots of crickets, lots of other things like that. But that probably is out of that whole group, all those different insects there, the most important one for many species for food. I've been out many times and seen coyote scat that was full of grasshoppers because they're eating them. They're very nutritious. They have fiber too. Unlike beef that we eat, doesn't have any fiber, but if you eat crickets or grasshoppers, you can get a lot of fiber and much higher protein content. That's why in other countries, they're eating them. They figured out, okay, not so bad. I have to confess, I've had to try them. I used to work for an entomologist, and he was real big on testing different kinds of insects, and I had a little bit of trouble with the legs. But, I think if you get past that, it might not be too bad. I did have some one time at a conference where they ground them up and made them into like little cookies or wafers or something.
You can buy them seasoned and chocolate covered on Amazon.
Yeah,
I'm going to make my students eat them next week.
Excellent. I think that's great. And so anyway, we're concerned about diversity also. The insect group is the biggest one. As far as species are concerned, they make up over 75% of species on Earth. And we don't even know what all they do. But a lot of what they do can be very significant, particularly the ones with biocontrol. Because if you lose a particular insect that's controlling a particular pest that has something to do with disease or with food or something like that, it can upset the whole thing and be major with one particular species. These are a few representative species from here in Texas. I think you're probably familiar with all of them. The horned lizard actually used to occur even on Galveston Island. You might find that surprising that they did. And they were so common there that the earliest records that they've written about them said that you couldn't walk across town in Galveston without almost stepping on them. They were so common. And of course, we don't see any of them here. They're gone. Prairie chickens and quail. We own Deer Park Prairie over in Deer Park. People who have been there in Deer Park for a long time, the old timers tell us that they used to hunt in those fields over there where our prairie still is. And both of these species were there. That is not much further back than the 50s. So just in our lifetime, we're seeing these species disappear. This is the Houston toad. It occupies a variety of habitats. I lived in Bastrop for a number of years, and there was a site right in the Park Road where they existed. And we never put a sign up or told anybody because we were afraid that if we did, something would happen to those toads. But their habitat has been pretty well decimated. And I think are y'all still working on Houston toads at Katy Prairie?
No, we actually don't have enough suitable habitat. What we're hoping to do is room shrimp horned lizard.
With the horned lizard, yeah. So right now, what we're trying to do is reinstate some of these wildlife species that have disappeared, and it's not easy to do. Box turtles, those are another one that are disappearing. The one that we have here is a three-toed box turtle. The scissor-tailed flycatcher represents a very important group of birds called neotropical songbirds. The ones who breed during the summer, they winter in South America. They are primarily insect eaters, and they're being devastated by the loss of species. Okay, so I'm going to switch now from pollinators and birds to mammals, and I'm actually, by definition, a mammologist, since that's what I did my research on. Prairie dogs were once very, very numerous and widespread, and you can see what their range was here, really from all the way up into Canada, all the way down through Texas, particularly on the western side. And there were just literally millions of them, and you could see them anywhere. They were very common. Okay, notice that it says they've reduced their populations to less than 2% of both their historical range and their numbers. That's even bigger than the monarch drop. That's pretty significant. So just keep that in mind. The current status of the prairie dog, you would think with a species that's declined that much in number that, oh my gosh, we'd be going crazy. They should be endangered species, right? No. Wrong. They're not protected in any way whatsoever. They're not considered threatened. They're not considered rare by our government, our federal government, and they're not considered endangered. So I guess you have to just completely disappear before anybody says, oh, yeah, maybe we should have listed those at some point. Right now, they have no protection whatsoever. And I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that, because a lot of people think they're protected. They are not. We have a preserve out in West Texas, in Mitchell County, which is in the Rolling Plains. It's over fairly close to New Mexico, that was donated to us, and the person who donated actually lived here in Houston. But he wanted us to try to bring the prairie back to its original state and all the animals that existed there. Well, I don't think we're going to be able to do the bison, but we decided, okay, we could at least try with prairie dogs, because we have prairie dog habitat, but we have no prairie dogs. And so we began a prairie dog restoration. We've done it 2 times. The first one failed, and we started a second one in 2006. That's what those years are down there. So it's been going on now for about a little over 11 years. And basically what happens is that when they put in a parking lot or a Walmart or something like that in cities like Lubbock, Abilene, even Amarillo, there are people there who care about those little prairie dogs, and they try to rush out and save some of them as they go about bulldozing their burrows or poisoning them, or they flush them with water and they drown them. There's a number of ways they kill them. But they kill them. They don't just go somewhere else when they put those parking lots in. Their colonies are destroyed. So there are people who go out and work really hard to try to catch them, which is not easy to do. But they are able to get at least some of them. And so we got a call in 2005 saying, we just rescued a bunch of prairie dogs in Abilene. Would you be interested in taking them? And so we called someone we knew in New Mexico had worked with a lot of prairie dog restoration, if he would come out and help us set up a restoration site. Because we had failed the first time because we basically just let them go. Doesn't work. They all die. So you can't do it that way. But he knew how to set it up so that we could get prairie dogs and then put them into a restoration site that would be successful. The things that kill prairie dogs, the things that are a problem for them, many of them have, many of these issues are the same ones that affect our insects. So when you do something to help any of these species we're talking about here, you'll be helping lots of other species besides them. Believe it or not, there is sports hunting for them. This was shocking to me. I'm not against hunting. I don't have anything against hunting, nor am I blaming any of those people that hunt them, because the way the ranches that have these hunts advertise them is they say, help us control our varmints. They consider them like rats. So what they do basically is people pay, they go out, they sit in a chair, and they shoot prairie dogs all day long. And that's what happens to them. So sports hunting is a problem. Everything wants to eat them. They're sort of like the bunny rabbits of the east. Everything depends on them for food that's out in the more western areas. And they get disease, in particular they get plague, which they're susceptible to. By the way, we do have plague in the western parts of the United States. And it can literally decimate a colony. So those are just 2 of the things. But then you have all the problems with habitat, agriculture, ranching, urbanization, woody species, fragmentation. They're very sensitive to fragmentation. Can you think of why they would be? Well, they're underground. They burrow underground for one. But they do travel at times during the year. And they will travel sometimes up to maybe even a mile or 2 to get to another prairie dog colony. And they do that, the males often do that, because they're looking for females from a different colony. Why would they do that? Genetic diversity, right, because that gives us more. We can't do that with ours. We have one colony. And a lot of the colonies that are out there now, there's just one colony. All the ones that are left are too far away for them to get to. And if you fragment everything with rows on top of it, they don't make it over to these other colonies. They just survive. We have no regulatory management, meaning that they're not protected in any way whatsoever. Throw climate change into that, more drought, more floods. They suffer from those things just like every other species does. And then, of course, people are out there. Okay, another story. Clovis, New Mexico. We were supposed to get some prairie dogs from Clovis, New Mexico. it turned in a huge to-do. We didn't get that group. And they actually passed an ordinance in Clovis to keep us from getting them. And every person that lived in the city limits of Clovis is required to kill any prairie dogs on their own property. Required.
Why was this?
Because they consider them like rats and that they're not healthy to have around and so forth. So they
But
were
you're
telling
getting
people.
the Texans, so I mean, what does it matter?
Clovis is in New Mexico. No, they didn't do that in Texas, but we had a group in Texas, especially right there where we were, who agreed with them and said, no, we're not going to let them bring them in here. So we do everything very, very quietly. We don't advertise any of our transfers. We still get prairie dogs, but we're just very, very careful about it because we don't want people to know when we're getting them. We keep our prairie dog colony right in the middle of the property where it cannot be seen from the road or anything. We do everything that we can to protect that colony so that they'll have a chance. Oh yeah, they use explosives too to get dynamite.
Caddyshack.
And these are the predators that they have to worry about, besides the job that the humans do. Everything, as I said, wants to eat them. The badger, which is over there in that corner, and all the different kinds of hawks like to eat them. Snakes, rattlesnakes are out there pretty common, and coyotes love them. Badgers and coyotes proved to be our two biggest problems when we were out there. In fact, we lost our first colony due to badger predation. Badgers are big diggers. They just dig really, really fast. And they can get down into a burrow and literally finish off every prairie dog that's in there. So they can be a big problem. So what we did is we built an electric fence with 5 strands of wire. I didn't know anything about electric fencing when I started this project. I've had to learn a lot and do some things I never thought I would do. Stringing electric fence is not that easy. But we think it's been fairly productive because we've been able to protect our colonies long enough for them to reproduce and become established. These are some volunteers. We've had a number of transfers. And basically what you do is you dig a trench, you put in a PVC pipe, that's what that black thing is right there, and then you set a cage over the top of it. And then the prairie dogs that they brought out, you have to take them and transfer those prairie dogs into this cage. And then the idea is that they will go down into that artificial burrow that's been made, and eventually they will dig out so that they come out. This side takes them anywhere from 4 or 5 days to a week, and they will dig out. And at that point, I don't know what it is that makes them stay, but they will stay and they will start digging their own burrows. Now, if we just released them, if we just let those prairie dogs go as soon as we got there at that site, they would not go in these burrows. They would just take off running, and they won't survive. They'll all die. So it's a tricky process to get them to stay there. And you have to try to keep them with families. Now, how do you tell? You can't ask them, are these your kids? So you don't know, and you have to try to keep them together because they get a little touchy when they have to be with other prairie dogs they don't know, and they'll start fighting with each other. So it's kind of like dealing with people in terms of just trying to get them, all to work together and not kill each other. So there's those issues on top of everything else. And every now and then in that transfer, one escapes. That's an actual picture that I took of one of our volunteers trying to catch a prairie dog. And actually there were a number of other people who were sliding all over the place. Prairie dogs are fast. They're very fast. And he has gloves. He knows how to catch them. They bite. They bite really good. These prairie dogs down here at the bottom, I happened to look around while this was going on. And so because we already had some prairie dogs out there, and we were bringing in new ones. They were all standing there watching just like the people were to see what was going to happen with the escapee. Was he going to make it? So it's just amazing how these things were so human-like in many, many ways. They did catch that one, by the way, and we got him safely into his appropriate burrow. And so eventually they, as I said, they dig out of this and they make their own burrows that look kind of like little volcanoes out there on the prairie. And this is our fence there, the electric fence that has 5 strands. For cattle we use 1. But we had to do that because the badgers are not very tall. They're kind of flat animals. And we found that with only 4 strands, they were going underneath the bottom of it. And so we had to get one strand that was almost down to the ground to try to keep them out. It's been fairly effective. One of the most interesting things about this prairie dog colony is seeing all the species that have started living in the burrows, around the burrows, or around the perimeter of the colony. And this is just a few of them. I didn't put them all up. I didn't even have room to put them all up. This beetle is interesting. This is a hive beetle. I don't know if you've ever heard of them or not, but they eat pieces of feather and animal debris of any kind. So they go down in the burrows and they just eat things that they find down in there to kind of keep things clean. They're not dung beetles though, but they are kind of not carnivorous, but they'll eat whatever kind of leavings that prairie dogs have. We have 2 species of quail out at this property as well that are quite abundant. In fact, the quail is the most abundant bird we have on the property. And they like to hang out for some reason right around the prairie dog. And when you go out there and you're at the prairie dog colony, you'll hear them calling all around. They're always, any time of day. And one of the things that ranchers have noticed that don't kill their prairie dogs, there's a few that don't, and let their cattle graze in between. The cattle actually like the prairie dog towns because the grass is more nutritious, particularly along the edges, because of the feces that are there, provides nutrients to the soil, and so it's a little bit richer and probably more nutritious. I found this bee, this is a Sonoran Honeybee, that was right on the edge, growing in a patch of, that's a yellow-colored paintbrush. Lemon paintbrush, and he was just buzzing around there right next. In fact, there was a prairie dog colony right next to him. We had 5 owls this year in March, 2 adults and 3 babies. So we're finally getting them to breed there. They're not always there, but they're there at least a portion of the year anyway. That's when we knew we were really successful. We have things that are rare, like Sprague's pipit, another species that they tried to get on the endangered species list, turned them down. You only see them a few places. So, and we have lizards like crazy. That's only a couple of them. The northern earless lizard and, of course, the horned lizard. And we have so many horned lizards out there that we have to keep our roads mowed and try not to run over them. So it supports a lot of deer. That's why they're called the keystone species, because they support lots of other animals with their burrows and all the things that go on out there. Okay, well, getting back to the monarchs, the thing that's interesting that I realized about the monarch and the prairie dog both is that they cover a range that's somewhat similar. Monarchs are more widespread on the east and west, but their major area that they come migrating through is through the Great Plains. And they've had a significant loss almost as the prairie dog, not quite, but almost. And we had a bad dip in 2013. So from 2003 to 2013, 27.5 acres is the space that was occupied in Mexico, where they literally all converge in one spot. They don't spread out anywhere, they're just right there. And then what we found in 2013 is that instead of being on 27.5 acres, they were on 1.5 acres. Big difference. And there are things that are going on in Mexico that we don't have a lot of control. We're working with them now trying to do a better job, but there's been a lot of forest clearing there and everything. And so that habitat is not in real good shape either. And it's a problem for animals that have that seasonal migration. They had a bounce back in 2016, and I'll show you a graph in just a minute, because in 2017 it's gone back down again. So we got excited there, thought, yay, they're going to come back. But what you have to look at is the overall trend. If you go from here and you follow it down to here, that line is down. It is not up. And it's that trend that you have to look at. You can't look at individual years. So here is the statistics from how many, we were talking about the area that they were in, we were looking at 2003, which is to 2013, which is right here. 13 is low, And then if you bring it on out to the 16-17 season, we're only about these are actually hectares, so that's less than acreage. And 95% of the monarch's population decline has occurred in the last 20 years. They have to travel over 3,000 miles from Canada to Mexico, and it takes 4 generations of those monarchs to ever get there. The monarchs that return to that one site in Mexico have never been there before. That's what blows my mind. How do they do that?
Haven't they had some significant snow events in some of those areas too?
Yes, they have. So again, when you start looking at climate change, where you have more and more erratic changes in your weather patterns, they already know that that is one of the things that's been impacting those populations, are these unusual weather events. And when you change temperatures for insects in particular, it can change a lot of their hormones in their body so that they don't always do things at the right time. That can mess up a lot of things like their breeding and their hibernation and everything. So it's another worry. So why are the monarchs declining? Okay, and you can kind of compare this to the prairie dogs, because they are in habitats that require plants for them to survive, and we're using glyphosate-tolerant corn and soybeans. What happens is that they spray this stuff, and it's indiscriminately. Okay, they spray it because what happens is they want to kill all of the things in between the corn and soybeans so that they have perfectly clean fields. There's nothing growing in there in between. Whereas they used to not be so clean, so there would be some habitat there for the butterflies. Now there's none. And not only are they managing the farms that way, but they're also doing the marginal areas like the roadsides or maybe a fallow field because they don't want them to contaminate their areas. So they're just glyphosating the heck out of all of it. And there's a use for herbicides. We use herbicides in restoration. But indiscriminate use of it over huge, broad areas that kills everything except the one plant you want to grow is probably about the worst thing that we can do. And why are we growing? What are we growing there and why? We're growing corn because it provides ethanol. And that's why so many acres that used to be something else that might have been habitat for species now is not. And it just keeps continuing. And development, of course, we're aware of that here in the Houston area. Huge areas have been developed. This number right here is old. I'm not sure how far it goes back, but it's not the most recent. I can tell you it's faster and more dramatic now. But even just that, from a few years ago, 6,000 acres per day is developed, 2.2 million acres per year. Going, gone. Where are these species going to go? We don't know. Fragmented habitats, because we create these pollinator deserts. When they are flying from Canada south, they're flying over fields where there's nothing there for them to eat. It's sort of like you trying to drive from Houston north and there's no McDonald's, there's no nothing, you better have your own food supply because there's nothing to eat. That would be what it's like. There's no place for them to stop over and get food. And so we're trying to work with all of those Great Plains states to figure out how to provide places that have food for them. Insecticides, we know it's having an impact. We think it's having an impact right at our Deer Park Prairie, so they spray a lot over there because of insect. People are worried about diseases. And so they're spraying the heck out of everything. It's hard to say how good or bad that is going to prove to be. We don't really know. Degradation of overwintering habitat. As I mentioned, in Mexico, there's issues down there with forest clearing. And then again, throw climate change in, and you get the changes in your spring and winter temperatures, and it messes up their internal biological clocks. So what can we do? Is there anything we can do? It sounds pretty hopeless when you look at it, frankly. But I think there are some things, and I definitely think we should never give up, that we should continue trying. So if you think about what the things are that wildlife needs, they are basic things. It's the same kind of things that we need. We need food, shelter, water, place to reproduce, and suitable habitat, because not all habitat is the same. There are places where the monarch wouldn't do well in a forested habitat, for instance. That wouldn't probably be the best place for a monarch. So different species have different needs and size needs. They need a certain size, so you can't just say, well, you know, if we have some of our parks and our houses in our cities that are made to be habitat for butterflies, but we're pretty well developed everywhere, is that going to be enough? I mean, I don't see that much right. I don't know about your neighborhoods. My neighborhood, the only place in my neighborhood that has habitat for butterflies is my house. Nobody else has that. And it may be that way where you are. I don't know. Hopefully we will gradually see more and more. One of the big problems we face is that sometimes when people try to do this, the city comes and knocks on your door and says, here's a ticket, you've got 1 day to mow your yard. I know people, I just talked to somebody in San Marcos that this happened to. So it's one of the issues that we face. So you can create native habitats wherever you are, your yard, your school, or go out and volunteer on some of the natural areas that we have, because maintaining them is very difficult, and we can use all the help we can get. By the way, we love students. As far as Deer Park is concerned, and I know Jaime works with them at Katy Prairie Conservancy, you know, we love to get them while they're still young so that we can have a chance to have an influence on how they view the landscape they live in.
Can I add something? So we have a joint team called the UP team, the Urban Prairies team. There's so many of these pockets that are popping up, we need help. So if you just email me, I can put you in contact with the person who can put you on the list. And a lot of these are on Saturdays, and
Yes.
they're in the city, and they're easy to get to, and they can involve your kids.
Yeah, I
Or
just
you.
recently worked with a group from Deer Park High School. They came out on one of our work days that we had scheduled, and they helped me do plant transects. And they loved it. They had never been out there before, and so it gives them an opportunity to do something. We also are hiring a new educator that we should have in place, I'm hoping by sometime in February, that will be setting up programs to work with students and things like that. So, and that's Deer Park Prairie, by the way, remembering where we're located, in Deer Park. So all these plants are a foundation for the food chain that all of these species have to depend on. So one of the things that you can do to help save your butterflies and so forth is make sure that you provide both pollinator species, in other words, things that they can get nectar from, but also something for the larvae to eat. This is a black swallowtail, and they love prairie parsley, and it's an easy plant to grow. It's weedy looking, but boy, do they love it. And you can be sure you're going to have black swallowtails for them. This is the Gulf Fritillary that requires passion flower. We have it growing wild out at Deer Park. We just leave it where it comes up because it provides food for their larvae. That's what their larvae look like, those tiny little things there on the leaf. And but you have to make sure that you have nectar supply for them as well. You'll have these butterflies here, Houston, year round if you can provide both the flowers and the plant for the larva. If you're going to try to create something in your schoolyard or your home or wherever, when you first start, go with something that's easy to grow. Because otherwise you'll just get frustrated. That's what happens a lot of times, and people try to say, well, you know, I couldn't grow anything, nothing came up. So pick things that grow easy. I'll put a few on here that I like. This is actually one of my favorite ones. This is Lanceleaf Coreopsis. It's literally spreading all over my yard now, and I love it in the spring. You have all the beautiful, and it actually bloomed up in through the fall. This one is easy to grow. This is the Indian paintbrush, but it's a biennial, so sometimes you have to reseed it if it doesn't reseed itself. The rest of these black-eyed Susans are so easy, and the blue mist I don't do anything for. It's like a weed in my yard. It just comes up, and you've got beautiful, and insects love it. So those are some examples of things that you can grow. There's lots of lists out there available on different websites. I know y'all have stuff that's available at Katy Prairie Conservancy, our Houston chapter. Does the Master Naturalist have anything like that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought
As well
so.
as the Native Plant Society.
And Native Plant Society, right. So there's a lot of different groups that you can go to their websites, and they've got lists that will tell you, here's, the best thing that you could plant for this area. This was a statistic that I found kind of startling. I didn't even realize this myself until recently. 1 in 5 native prairie plant species are either rare, endangered, or facing extinction. That was shocking. Okay, except that when I got to thinking about it, it's like, yeah, that's probably right, because I don't see these plants everywhere. I do not see them. How many of you seen a snowy orchid unless you've been out to Deer Park? Where did you see it?
It's gone now. It's, it was back behind Klein Collins High School. It was Harris County Flood Control, and
Yeah.
it's gone.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much what happens to them. And the sad thing is that none of these species are getting put on any endangered species list or threatened species list, state or federal. Trying to get anything on those lists right now is impossible. So they're not going to be on there. We just have to be aware that a lot of them are threatened and try to preserve the spaces that they can grow in, and that's all we can do.
I think that's-
These, by the way, were all taken out at Deer Park Prairie.
Is that a propeller flower on the far left?
That one over there, yes. It's sometimes called the propeller flower. They also call it the purple fleet plant. I have to be careful saying that. And this one, by the way, if you were wondering, is a carnivorous plant. It's about this big, grows right on the ground. In fact, you'll start seeing it in February. It's a sundew, and I know that's one that kids are always fascinated with, because it's carnivorous and it catches little insects and stuff. We have that out at Deer Park too. And I dare say you're not going to find these in most places in Houston anywhere, and we have a lot more of them there. So saving those special places where these plants can still grow is a really important thing to do, and we hope you'll encourage your students or your associates in your various organizations to do that. It's really good to have a mix of annuals and perennials, and you try to look at what the growing season is, because especially for pollinators, you want to have something out there all year long. But it's important for birds too, because those plants provide insects that are living on them, and those insects then in turn provide food for a lot of birds. This is one, in fact, it's got a little insect on it right there. This was photographed in January of last year. And that's Fritillary. It's a fairly easy one to grow, and sometimes it's about the only thing out there that's growing at that time of year. Of course, we want everybody to plant milkweed. I encourage everybody to plant native milkweed. It can be grown. There are a number of websites you can go to that will tell you various ways to germinate your native, your milkweed seeds. We rescued ours and planted it, and I noticed that this year I had larvae on it for the first time, and we just transplanted ours. But those are a couple of it. That's green milkweed and butterfly milkweed. Both of these are native, and there are a lot of butterflies that like that as a nectar plant, besides it being the larval host for the monarch and the queens. Top flowers, people ask me this all the time, and they're like, what's the best butterfly attractant? Okay, I have 3 that are my favorite. One of them, I don't know is it common here in this area, although I know it grows where I am. I'm in Conroe, and that's golden crownbeard. It's also called cowpen daisy, because it has kind of a strong odor associated with it, and it will grow in very disturbed soil like what you would find in the cowpen. And so that's why it's called that. But I find so many butterflies on this. It's fantastic. It's weedy. Probably a lot of farms and ranches say, oh, it's a weed, get rid of it. It grows in cowpen. But boy, is it a great pollinator nectar plant. And this is a number 1. Number 2 for me is the Indian blanket. 1, because it's so easy to grow, and 2, because I realized when I went back through all my butterfly pictures, I had more butterflies taken off this plant than any other. And so it's like, okay, it's telling me something. They like it. And I grow this one in my yard. It's pretty tall and weedy, but I do most of the backyard, so it won't be in the front, although I have one in front that I kind of keep it flipped down. But look at all the variety of insects: wasps, true bugs, bees, butterflies, and over there, even love bugs like it. So it will support a large variety. This is late flowering bonset. I don't even know where you can buy this stuff. It's a weedy thing. And do you know, have any idea where you can get
I
it?
picked tons of it at Armin Bayou.
Yes, so
It's easy to grow.
very easy to grow. I don't ever do anything. Once mine got started, it just keeps coming back every year. And I love it because there's so many insects that it attracts. It's where I go photograph everything. Prairie plants that monarchs like, if that's your goal, some easy ones are prairie verbena, Maximilian sunflower, any kind of echinacea. They love asters. Asters are real weedy, you know, so if you have a place in your yard that's kind of weedy and you get these little aster flowers, just let them grow. They like them. Thistles. In fact, a lot of these are what people consider weeds. And the butterfly looks at them and says food. So, and of course, milkweed for it. I like to make sure I have a huge variety of berries in my yard. This is getting a little away from prairies, but prairies have wooded areas along the riparian areas and along the edges of the prairie. And a lot of our species are those edge species, and those berries are important to many, many different forms of wildlife.
Nothing is my beauty berry.
Really? The mockingbirds love it at my house. They fight over it.
But she's from East Central. She's from San Antonio. It's not very common. It's very common here in East Texas.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's just not.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised because I know that mockingbirds fight with each other over mine.
Oh, yeah.
They love it. And as soon as they get ripe, they start disappearing. They'll do one stalk at a time. And there
They
they
do
go.
tend to need that freeze to sharpen the taste.
Maybe so, I don't know. It's also good to provide shelter. We were talking about the artificial burrows for the prairie dog. You can also do artificial burrows for burrowing owls if you have habitat where you could do it. We have one landowner, it's an easement just southeast of San Antonio. They're restoring 200 acres of prairie there. They put in an artificial burrow. They haven't been seen there in years and years and years. And now they've seen them 3 times. They haven't stayed yet, but they've at least come to investigate it and take a look at it. So that was really exciting. Because I'll tell you, it's one thing to restore the plants on a prairie. That's hard enough. And when you start trying to put the species back there that belong there, then it's really hard. It's not that easy. So leave some things in your habitat that you're working with that will give protection for species. Wood. People ask me, where do butterflies go when there's a storm, when it's raining? They get on the underside of a leaf and they hang there. So you want to make sure that you've got adequate structure there for things to hide in. Willow trees, if you're wondering about trees, what are the best trees? I suggest willow and pecan for birds and for butterflies. I mean, there's lots of others. Mulberries are real good too. Those are all native trees. This one is at one of our properties that we own, the ones where the prairie dogs are. We also get the monarch fallout along our riparian area there. That one is at my ranch out in West Texas. We have one section of creek that's got willows on it. The monarchs come every October by the thousands and thousands. So those fallouts do still happen. And we think they're moving west, but we don't know for sure. Don't be afraid to leave some things that some people would say are unsightly. I have one client who went and cut down things like this because they didn't think it looked neat. It may not look neat to you, but look for the beauty in it. I see snags now and I go around photographing. It's like, oh wow, look at that gorgeous snag. Because they just, I don't know, they look kind of artistic too. But that's a home for so many species. There are over 40 species of just a mix of all kinds of wildlife in Texas that utilize that kind of habitat for their home, for their shelter, for reproduction, and so forth. And it can be something, that was a brush pile that was in my yard for a while until the flood took it away. But, you know, things like that, the sparrows, God, they love it. I know people worry about snakes, but I've been out in habitat all my life. I'm a wildlife biologist. I have yet to have an encounter with a snake because I'm always looking for them. Maybe that's the difference. I don't know. And I've kept all kind of stuff like that around my house. Here's some species utilizing some of those things that we think are just trash, those snags and stuff. They like to get up on these things. It gives them a view. It helps them find food. helps them with their protection, gives them a place to rest. Have you ever seen a turtle not on a log when it's out of the water? Well, sometimes they do get up on the bank, but most of the time, where do they go? They get on a log. That's where they want to be. This lizard is real interesting, and I put this in here. It's out at my ranch. The temperature that day was about 117. And we finally decided after talking to some people, and it wouldn't move. It was just sitting up there. And they said, oh, well, that's because the temperature was a lot hotter on the ground because it's solid rock down below. And so it was staying up there because it was cooler, and it could also catch insects on the fly if they went by. So those snacks can be real important. You can provide shelter for your bees. There's all kind of bee houses. Just be aware that bees also like nest boxes, and that sometimes they will take them over. These are bees that are also in a nest box here, and they were in a nest box there too. So, you know, they think those are great houses for them also. And you can get all kinds of plans on ways to provide bee houses for solitary bees. And you can provide it for birds as well. The bluebird's one of my favorite. They do well in this area. Probably if you put a bluebird box up in your yard and you've got some trees as well as some open space where there's a lot of flowers and stuff where they can get insects, you just might have some bluebirds. And provide water, because every kind of wildlife will come to water. I don't know if y'all can see that one down there, but those are bees lining the water that came for a drink.
My pond.
Yes.
Thousands descend.
Yes.
That's it right there.
And so insects need water too.
Insane. It hums.
And you can provide water for butterflies. You don't need very much. They don't like to stand in water, but they like moisture. They like it to be wet. If you do, this is one of those little nursery plastic dish things. Don't fill it up where the mosquito can breed in it. But if you just get a little sand under some pebbles and get it moist and keep it moist, that will bring butterflies because that's what they like. And these are some of my friends in my yard that come and visit me for, I guess because of all the wildlife. The raccoons entertain us quite a bit, except I had to bring my feeders in at night because they're so adept at figuring out how to get into them. No matter what I do, they figure it out. You know, I get all kinds of visitors like opossums and stuff. This one actually was at a talk that I was giving in Central Texas in an open pavilion in the evening. And just as I started talking, somebody pointed up and they said, oh, look up in the rafters. And we looked up and here was this guy. That's him. We took a picture of him. And he's just looking down. He was literally right even with me. He was looking down at me. And so we kind of all waited a minute, but he didn't move. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and do my presentation. He'll probably get up in just a minute and take off. I figured as soon as I started talking, waving my hands around, you know, he would leave. Well, he didn't leave. I did a 45 to an hour talk, and he sat there the whole time just like that, watching me, every move. When I stopped talking, he left. So everybody that was at that evening talk was saying, you staged that, you brought that thing in here, and you put it up there, didn't you? And they really thought I had done it. I had nothing to do. I mean, he did what he wanted to do. But I felt pretty good because I thought, wow, if I can entertain a ring-tailed cat for an hour, that's not too bad. So. And there's my squirrel that comes in. He's hanging on by his toes on the edge of the roof there. Many of y'all seen that. Those things are crazy gymnasts. And here's our grassland birds that are all disappearing at an alarming rate for the same reasons that the prairie dogs and everything else. There's a whole suite of grassland birds. These are some of the important ones here in this area, particularly the meadowlark. I can remember when I lived in Houston many, many years ago. I actually lived in Pasadena. And there was a big field in back of my house. And sometimes that field would just turn dark with all the birds, the blackbirds and the meadowlarks, just tons and tons of them. And you don't see those big flocks of meadowlarks anymore. They've declined by something like 60% in the last 45 years, which is amazing.
What's that one in the lower center?
This one right here?
Yes.
You probably won't see that very often. It's a grasshopper sparrow.
Grasshopper Sparrow.
Yes. And they're not very abundant, and they'll only usually be found in places that have good grass habitat. And this is a shrike, this is a dick thistle. Every one of our prairies, and I'm sure y'all have them too, where you've got native prairie, you'll have hundreds of them singing away. But you don't see them other places. I saw the neatest thing this year. This is a sedge wren. I was up in one of our prairies in northeast Texas. We were out early in the morning. It was freezing. It had just started to go above 32. We were driving on the road, and there were hundreds of these little sedge wrens out on the road. I've never seen anything like it. And we were trying not to run over them. There were so many of them. I don't know if they were there because the sun had started to come up and maybe it was warmer on the road. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. We had no idea that were that many sedge wrens there. We knew they were there. We'd seen them once or twice. You see them pop up, but no, there were hundreds of them in a native prairie. So, and that's a savanna sparrow right there, which is one of the real common ones. And if you're in a wet prairie like we have at Deer Park, you might scare one of these guys up. This is an American bittern. I was walking out there one day with my boots. The water was about a foot deep. All of a sudden, these giant birds go whoosh right up in my face. And there were 3 of them. They were American bitterns. I managed to get a picture later on when I ran into some other ones out there at Deer Park. Or you might see this guy if you can manage to see him, which is a snipe.
I thought my cousins were just kidding me about sniping.
I think I was about to
Sing
say
up, right? At night.
50 years. That's all. 50 years and they're gone. Tropical songbirds that we have here, notice they're all really colorful. Many of them are. They're our favorite songbirds. These are the ones that go back and forth from continent to continent. What do they eat on?
Indigo band.
Insects, primarily. If the insects are gone,
It's martins.
these are going to go too. Here's some more of our neotropicals. Probably the most loved bird in America maybe is that scissor-tailed flycatcher, at least in this part of the world. And that's eastern phoebe on that side, and these other 2 are eastern kingbird.
Kingbirds.
All your flycatchers are primarily neotropical songbirds. They eat lots of insects. That's okay. That last slide said, if you want to save monarchs and prairie dogs, save a prairie. It's a real simple idea. Now, if you can't do something to help save a prairie, you can at least try to put some of that prairie in your habitat wherever you're at, in your schoolyard. It's a great place for kids to get out, walk around, see real wildlife. And it's great for them to record all the things that they see, record the birds they see, the changes that they see. Lots of good opportunities for teaching about many of the things that you have to teach in your school program that you can actually go out and just see. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I heard correctly, so I apologize if I missed this. Did you say that prairie dog population is down to 2% of its original?
2% of their range, and the population estimates nobody is totally sure of because it's hard to count. I don't know if any of you ever tried to count prairie dogs, but it's not easy. So they estimate that their population, because they only have 2% of their range left, is probably somewhere close to that. And they estimate 95% of the monarch population has, disappeared. So we don't know exactly, but it's low.
Did you have a slide that showed like 4 different territories?
Yes.
So
the reason those other ranges were on there is because there's other species of prairie dog besides the blacktail. The blacktail is the most common, and it's the one that stretches all the way from Canada down south. There's a population in Mexico. There's one in Colorado, the Gunnison prairie dog, and then there's one up around Utah. But none of those occupies large an area, and they're more western species.
So collectively, all 4 of those territories have shrunk.
Yes.
Okay, so it isn't just one.
No, it's not just
species or
one.
subspecies.
I didn't mention that, but yes, there are actually 4 species. And the other species, by the way, are more endangered than the black-tailed
Yeah, and then, so that's what my follow-up question, I don't understand the regulatory protocol for getting a species listed with the Fish and Wildlife, but is there not a petition process?
Oh, they've been petitioned many times. Yeah, believe me, people have worked on this.
Okay, and so.
And they get turned down every
Right.
time.
So what holds it up? Is it a public comment period where cattle industry comes out, or?
Well, there is part of
Is it?
that is part of it. So the way it works is that the Fish and Wildlife is required to show that the processes that a species is exposed to is imminently endangering its existence. So I don't know what they do, but they don't seem, even if they've got some data that shows that, and there's a lot out there that shows it, you still have these forces on the other side that are agricultural. Believe me, you all may be sympathetic to prairie dogs. There's a lot of people out there that are not. As I said, in Clovis, New Mexico, they're requiring you to kill them. Not everybody's like that. There are ranchers right now that actually come to us every now and then and say, hey, we want to get our prairie dogs back. We like them because they're gone. But there are not many like that. Most of them are on the other side, yes.
What was the fifth bird on that first neotropical slide? You had the bunnings, the painted, the lazuli, and the indigo. You had a blue grosbeak, and what else?
I can't remember now. There,
Barn swallow.
barn swallow. Right, all your swallows, by the way, are neotropical. And you had the other species of bird. Yeah.
Yeah, you got me thinking about something, which is, you showed the grasshopper slide up there. And I was thinking, maybe the biggest herbivore of the prairies is gone. Which, I wonder if, even more than bison, if it was a North American locust.
Well, they certainly would have made a dent in the prairie, that's for sure, because at one time there were just huge clouds of them, and we don't really see that anymore.
Has anybody talked about reintroducing them? I don't know if you read the book Locust, but the author is a grasshopper expert, and he hints that he thinks they may exist in their their non-plague form in one of the national parks.
Didn't they
That's
look
interesting.
into the original
I don't know the
home ground
answer
and
to
destroyed
that.
it or something?
That's one reason why we want to start a program within our prairie system, where we start recording something similar to what that study did in Germany, so that we can see if any of this stuff is happening here also. We think it is, but we don't know. Yeah.
Did you mention your chapters around the state, since we have teachers around the state?
No, thank you for asking. We now have chapters around the state. We have one, our oldest one is here in Houston, but we now have a chapter in Fort Worth, one in Dallas, one in San Antonio, one in Georgetown, which kind of serves the Austin area, and we have a brand new startup in Victoria area. So, and we had all of those chapter meetings. They have all hold meetings. They have people come in who are working with restoration or with some of these prairie species and so forth. Many of them are very, very knowledgeable that come in and give presentations. They do workshops. They have field trips. We have tours coming up, by the way, which are probably the most fun thing to do. We've got two slated, one for June and one for, we think it's going to be in April, which is the Wildflowers and Wine Tour that we have not done yet, but we want to. It'll be to the Fredericksburg area, where all the beautiful wine, and the wine is there too. And these trips are so much fun because you get to go with people who all like the same thing, and so you meet all these people, and we stop at good places to eat. Got to have good food too, right? And the other one that we have is the Northeast Texas prairies, and we're going to go visit first the prairie that we just got through raising money to save. I don't know if any of you heard it. We were trying to raise money for a little prairie called Paul Matthews that's just east of Dallas. And it's one of the few true blackland prairie sites that's left. And we were able to raise that money successfully. We're in the process of completing the buy of it right now. And so that's going to be on our tour. Climber Meadow, which is one of the most famous prairies in Texas, will be on that tour. Probably Gamble Goose, and then over to the last stop on the tour will be our 900-acre Daphne Prairie. And oh my gosh, this is the part everybody loves the most because the guy who owns it is a fabulous host. He sets up a hayride for us, and then he invites everybody over to a catered dinner at his museum, which is his family church that he bought and converted it to a museum. And it's got all these fantastic early Texas history, artifacts that are in there, and he just invites everybody in, and you have a great time. That tour is coming up in June. So anyway, I don't know how we managed to get into the tour business, but we started it on just kind of a wheel. Oh, let's try tours. But it was so successful, we filled it up. We have one in Central Texas to Burleson Prairie. Now, I don't know if you've heard of that one, but it's another famous one. And some of our other easements, and it all filled up too, and everybody had a great time, and everybody keeps saying, oh, you gotta do more, you gotta do more, so we're doing more. So watch our website. It's www.texasprairie.org. And I have cards, if anybody would like a card, because it's on my card too, so you have a good access. Anything else? Well, thank you for being so tolerant.